So yeah, today we're talking Pratyahar. Now, when Pratyahar is the fifth limb of yoga, and we discussed Pranayama last week. And according to Patanjali, Pranayama, the breath and the understanding how to move the energy, the bioenergy around your body, that's pranayama. So it's not just breath, it's also learning to control and move bioenergy. Once you know how to do that, then you are ready for the higher practices of yoga. Right? And we're going to come back to the aphorism number 48. We're still in the sadhana, but now aphorism 48 was, for me, I think, the most important, or I should say the one that was most groundbreaking for me. It's basically forced me to go out and research numerous things. And this is when asana enables you to experience the non-dual, then you can fully benefit from pranayama. And we spent a little bit of time talking about this last week. But basically, this pranayama, the idea that pranayama comes after you found balance in asana. Okay, now we're going to jump across, right, to the benefits of why pranayama, or what pranayama does for you. Why does it enable you to experience or enter into the higher planes of yoga? Well, basically, once you can use pranayama, once you fully benefit from pranayama, then the veil covering the light of the true self vanishes. So basically, we have access to ourselves, to the real self, your highest self. And then he jumps on to talk about dharana. Dharana, the mind develops the capacity for harmonious thoughts. So once you can still the mind, once you're able to breathe properly, and if we just go back, and the veil, all the coverings that prevent us from understanding our true selves are removed, then the mind develops the capacity for harmonious thoughts. So what happens is Patanjali talks about pranayama, and then he jumps to talking about dharana, right? And dharana, we know, is the next limb, the sixth limb of yoga. And then he comes back to Pratyahar, because the truth is, the reason he does that is, and this is what we're going to explore today, is that Pratyahar is actually the combination of the two. It's the combination of the breath and the learning to move the energy, the awareness of the body, that's asana, the breath, how to breathe correctly, the learning how to move the energy across the body. But you also need the concentration and the focus and the ability to harmonize your thoughts. You need the dharana in order to experience Pratyahar. Now, Pratyahar is referred to as harmony with emotions. It is achieved when the senses, mind, and consciousness are withdrawn from the external and turned inwards. Now, when he talks about Pratyahar, which is the harmony of emotions, that's the benefit of Pratyahar. Because then he goes on to tell us how to achieve Pratyahar. Now, the other thing that he goes on, now this one is about the benefits of Pratyahar, right? Pratyahar, which the benefit is harmony of the emotions. And when you can achieve Pratyahar, that which is changeable, mutable in the human beings, the chitta, remember the chitta vritti, the continuous fluctuation of the mind, that chitta becomes similar to your true nature. That gives you the access to yourself. And this is where the veils covering the light of the true self vanishes. Because when you have Pratyahar, you have access to your true nature, because you can still the fluctuations. Any questions about that?
Is this a state of meditation when you're in deep meditation then? Or am I on the wrong path?
No, it's so basically this is when, we talked about the asana, right? When your asana becomes a meditation, becomes relaxed, when you're breathing correctly, right? In that breathing is the taking in, being able to hold your breath, being able to exhale appropriately. Then you develop the next part of what is known as pranayama, the controlling the energy. We talked about the 5 pranas. When you achieve that, then you have this ability to harmonize your emotions. You have the ability to still the mind. So yes, it is the gateway. And this is the reason he talked about dharana. When we talk about dharana, we're already talking about meditation, because dharana is step 1 of meditation, learning to focus. Dharana is learning to focus. Dhyan is concentration, when we can maintain the focus. And samadhi is when that focus or that meditation becomes a state of being. But the gateway, what enables all of this to happen, or the entry point of meditation, is the pratyahar. But the pratyahar is not possible if you can't do the pranayama. And now from this point onwards, when I'm talking pranayama, I mean the 2 parts of pranayama, right? The breathing before the asana, the benefits after the asana, so the being able to move the energy across the body. But then the asana comes in there as well. So the reason we use the asana is actually to strengthen the muscles, so you can breathe deeply, to strengthen the muscles, so you can hold the body appropriately and allow this energy to flow. And with more control of the muscles, you can actually use your muscles to actually move energy across the body. That's what the Kapalbhati and the Nauli practices are about, training those muscles so you can move energy across your body. So yes, he's not saying it's meditation, but it's the gateway to meditation. Does that make sense, Seema?
That makes sense. What I was confused about, sorry everybody, is the bit where it says harmony with emotions, is because the word emotion is happy, sad, and all of this sort of stuff. But when you're doing pranayama, you're free from all of that, aren't
Exactly.
you?
And how are you free from all of that?
Because you're in a different state, basically.
Because you've harmonized everything, haven't you?
Okay.
It's homeostasis, it's balance.
Right. But that doesn't mean that means that you still have emotions, though, doesn't?
I mean, the thing is, when you're a highly evolved meditator, I don't think you stop having emotions. You're just not overwhelmed by your emotions. You can still show compassion. You can still do the very compassionate act. Maybe you won't be broken down to tears, because you can learn how to, I don't want to use the word control, but you know how to utilize your emotions productively. But it doesn't mean that emotion, that movement through emotion, is movement through the body. The movement through the body can take you on a tangent, or that movement in the body can get you to focus on the task that needs to be done.
So aren't there other paths to the stillness of the mind outside this path?
Is there any meditation where you can do erratic breathing and get into your meditative state?
Oh, no, but it happens as a secondary. The breathing comes under control as it really slows down, but it's not a focus. It's a secondary byproduct of the meditation.
Yeah. So, meditation techniques are either top down or bottom up. So you can either use top down processes, as I'm going to focus to still all of this, or you can use a bottom up process to say, I'm going to still all of this so that I can achieve focus. At the end, they're all amounting to the same thing. It's just top down or bottom up. Which way do you want to
So using the body as the starting point suits yogis, but using another method could suit other individuals. And does that still get you to the same final goal?
Well, yes, the end state of complete harmony if that's the final goal, then it will get you to the final goal. If the final goal is harmony, it depends. You also get various meditative practices, right? Where the final goal is not this. The final goal is like, with the Pratyahara, where you're looking at a candle gazing. It is for stillness, etc. But what you're really training in that meditative practice is focus. Focus, even if your heart rate is fluctuating. That one, eventually it will slow down. The aim, so when it comes to meditative practices, they don't all have the ultimate same point. But if the ultimate same point is that complete balance, equilibrium, homeostasis, equanimity, whatever you want to call it, moksha, nirvana, then it's going to achieve the same end. I mean, like a power yoga practice can be meditative, but the end goal is strengthening your body.
This is a very holistic approach then. It's looking after every element of your body, your emotional state, your homeostasis, your physical. It's comprehensive. Yeah.
And this is, yoga is union. If we leave anything out, it can't be yoga.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to the next one, right? Pratyahar results in mastery of the sense organs. Now, he goes on to explain this. When the sense organs have ceased to chase pleasures of the world, then they can be directed for higher purposes. Now, he's talking about higher purposes. He could mean meditation, as in dharana, dhyana, samadhi, but you can also, when you learn how to control your senses, you can stick to your diet because you're not going to crave food. You can use this for the higher purposes, whatever that higher purpose may be. So yes, it is. However, for the meditative, for any higher purpose, you need to be able to discipline yourself. You need to be able to control all of this. And he's given us a way already to get to this point where we can exert some sort of control. Now, when we look at yoga, right, external awareness, looking at the outer world helps us see the objects of the world, but also being able to look at the outer world creates, thoughts of attraction, rejection. We think we like things, we don't like things. If we're not aware, if we're not paying attention to the things that we're responding to in the outer world, we can become almost hypnotized by certain things. We don't even know why we're following them or chasing them or doing them. You get, there's multiple words for this in like peer pressure, caught in the moment, herd mentality, following the crowd. It just becomes a thing, right? If you're externally directed. As humans, because we are so interconnected to everything around us, it's very easy to just follow the crowd, follow the herd. But Pratyahar is about realizing the effect that these external stimuli is having on our internal state of being, so that we can start making better choices. So the reason we're learning how to control them is that we can, number one, become aware of the effect that they're having on us. And then number two is decide, is it something I want or I don't want? And if it's something that you don't want, if you have the control, you can decide not to focus and shift your awareness elsewhere. So Pratyahar, the way it reads in multiple texts, is akin to attentional control. It's like attentional control mixed in with discipline. Now, the other thing that many of the Upanishads mention is that through overstimulation, the organs of perception have, no longer perceive certain stimuli. We know this now. It's called habituation. If we're overexposed to something, we eventually no longer notice it. You know, the whole, you know, it's a horrible analogy, but the thing is, you know, with the frog, and if you dip bit by bit of the frog in hot water, the frog's actually not going to realize the water's hot, and eventually it will boil itself. But we're exactly the same. If we're exposed bit by bit to something, even if it's disastrous for us, eventually it consumes us and we're in it. And we can't even see how it's destroying us. Right? Because we just habituate. That's how we overcome challenges. You know, it helps us in some ways. You know, we can overcome challenges because of this, because we just habituate. You know, there's a variety of other concepts too that are related to this. You know, Stockholm syndrome, where we start to sort of relate to even our captors. It's just a way that human beings are made. But we don't have to just follow that process. We can develop the awareness to overcome it. And once again, then he goes on to talk about these past impressions. You know, these past impressions can drive us. Our conditioning can drive us to be hypnotized or focused on things in the external world if we do not develop this inner awareness, if we do not develop this pratyahar. So we're just going to look a little bit at Pratyahar, because he talks about inner awareness, and all these texts talk about inner awareness. And when we talk about Pratyahar, I'm just going to scoot a little further forward. When we talk about Pratyahar, we come back to this diagram of how everything from the outside is coming in and everything from the inside. You know, all these mamas, nadis, chakras that we talked about before. When we talk about Pratyahar, that image is constantly used. You see it in multiple ways, right? But Pratyahar is inner awareness. And according to all the texts, all the yoga texts, all the Upanishads, etc., that all the yoga Upanishads that relate to this area, as well as all the meditative Upanishads, tells us that inner awareness gives you an insight that helps you make better decisions, better choices, and it gives you access to deeply meditative states. So that deeply inner meditative state of samadhi has to come via this method. So whether it's focus from top down, if you can override your body and everything else that's happening in the environment, if you have that level of mental focus, then you can override all of these sensations. However, if you don't have that sort of mental focus, then the easier practice is going to be coming bottom up. And, for me, having read about Pratyahar, it was actually, that statement, aphorism 48, that got me thinking about it. But what does he mean, the benefit of pranayama? Haven't we already learned pranayama? What is it? It's not the practice. And then it was the word, the benefit. What is the benefit? And this whole inner energy. And it got me looking deeply into this area for a number of years and trying to find a way to understand it, to make sense of it. And I started reading around and found books, initially books written by William James, going back to Sherrington, going back to the early descriptions of human perception to understand what it was that we could perceive, what was it within the body. Plus, for me, it was a very personal thing. So this is where it becomes very, very personal. So, as a child, and we all have this experience where we perceive things and our assumption is that everybody experiences the world the way we do. This whole idea, theory of mind, if I know that the sweets have moved position, everybody's going to know that the position has changed of the sweet. That famous experiment where they take sweets and they put it into a cupboard and they ask the child if the person who left the room would know. And the child's assumption is, well, they probably know, until they develop theory of mind. I know this doesn't mean, because they were not there, it doesn't mean that they know it. Right. So for me, this big thing was I had this way of perceiving the world. My assumption was that everybody perceived the world the way I did, until I reached a point where I realized, actually, I perceive things that are slightly different. I'm seeing something here. I understand something from the situation. And my friends and my parents and they don't actually understand this. So there's two things, it happened to me at about the age of 9 or 10, where it starts becoming, you start becoming aware of it, but at that age, it doesn't bother you. But then you get to about 12, the teenage years, when you start thinking, well, actually, if I'm going to talk about all the things that I can perceive that people can't understand, well, people already think I'm quite weird. So I either don't say it, or I try to understand why I feel this way and why am I seeing it this way or perceiving things this way. And even though I'm trying to explain to other people, they don't know. So for me at that stage, this is when my obsession with the human body started. With why am I? Because for me, it was so real. I was experiencing this. It was not a lie. I think it was like, I remember, saying things to myself, well, I'm not telling a lie. This is real. I honestly feel this. So why aren't you feeling it too? And this led me to start looking at, really trying to understand the human body, trying to understand how we perceive things, and then reading a lot of philosophy and reading the early psychology texts by the time I was 16 or 17. And there was this word that popped up in the text called introspection. It was first described, it was a French Charles Bernard, that actually hinted at it, this inner awareness. And then there was Sherrington, it was an American physiologist that talked about extroception, proprioception, the different ways of human perception and the way we perceive information in our body. And he mentions introception, but then introception gets kind of like pushed to the side because the years that came, we didn't actually understand how this worked. Plus, at that point, it was this autonomic nervous system. It's all unconscious. So we're never really going to understand this whole introceptive thing. And then in my sort of early 20s, I had a few meditative experiences that were very real. And at this time, I felt I was able to look at it more objectively and realize, well, actually, there's something to it and I need to research it. And I was already involved in research by that stage. So I started looking for ways to understand what I was going through and started studying. And then I found a document, early notes by a researcher, Antonio Damasio. And this was very early papers based on something that he was calling the somatic marker hypothesis. And the somatic marker hypothesis said that sensations arise in the body, and these sensations become emotions. So this whole bottom-up process. And before that, we weren't really thinking about emotions from that point of view. And when I read that, it reminded me, I'm going to come back to the slide, it reminded me of something that I read, and this is my paper, but basically something that I read when I was really young, and it sort of influenced my life. It was a quote by Leonardo da Vinci, and it was in one of his very, very early translations. One of his very early, I think it was a Vassario text that I read about Leonardo da Vinci, and he said, everything we know comes from feelings. Everything we know comes from feelings. And when I read this thing by Damasio, it reminded me of something that I thought, as a teenager, I can't remember when I first saw it, but it was definitely, I was quite young. It was something that was meaningful to me. It made sense. I knew that what Leonardo da Vinci had said was true, but I just didn't know how to prove it. So when I went back and I started reading more about Damasio, I realized, well, actually, there's more to it. And then I started reading around this area and came across some very, very early papers talking about, well, quoting William James, also talking about this theory of, we know because of this perception that comes up from our body, feelings and how the feelings become thoughts, and these sensations actually leads to thoughts. And then I started looking more into this area. And then there were a few very early papers in terms of introspection. So these images that I have on the screen right now, I mean, the one on the top is from sort of 6th century BC, but the introspection image is a very modern image. Basically, what I was coming to determine was that this whole idea of what I was trying to understand, how my perceptions were occurring, because I was absolutely certain as a teenager that my perceptions or what I was thinking, what I was feeling it was senses coming through my body, and that I couldn't make sense of or I could make sense of it. Maybe other people couldn't make sense of it, but I was absolutely certain that it was real. And I needed to prove that I know these things, not because I'm crazy, but because they're real. And yeah, so it went on to looking more into introception. Now, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about what introception is. Introception is awareness, inner awareness. It's described as inner awareness. And in the recent years, we've come to understand that there's a neural basis of introception. There's a tract in the dorsal part of our spinal cord that enables us to perceive everything in the body. So you look at the diagram at the center, the yellow nervous system, that's the entire nervous system. And every cell in the body transmits information back to the brain, including the skin cells. And these cells are picking up all sorts of information. Now, if you look at the guy on the left, mechano, thermo, and chemo sensors, they're in our skin, across our skin. So every part of our skin has the ability to pick up mechanical sensation, temperature changes, chemical sensations, right? But in the early years, introception was this thing. It wasn't a wide area of study. There were just a few researchers, sort of looking back at William James, going back. Damasio was so he wasn't really studying introception, but he was talking about somatic markers. He was more focused on the emotion of it. And I was absolutely certain that we were going to find this track. And then it was found. And I decided to go ahead and focus on this area very, very early. So everything that I'm showing to you now, or when you look at my original diagrams, you're going to see how far back they go. So all of this is new now. But what we know about introception is that this is recent. This is now. We know that introception plays a role in absolutely everything in our life. Introception is tied into homeostasis, and homeostasis keeps us alive. So that diagram with all those nadis, everything interlaced, and exactly what they were saying, that everything is interconnected, is exactly what we know about introception now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, my research. This is just a diagram simplifying things about nerve fibers, etc., and all the interoceptive markers across the body. We're focusing on the heart, etc., but there are many more, and we'll discuss that, or we can talk about that a little later. This is one of the first papers that I've done. And originally when I came to it, remember, I was coming at it from a point of view is that these sensations or these things that I feel, how do I feel them? So originally there were lots of computer generated or AI simulations to try and understand how this multiple bits of information can actually come together to arise in specific thoughts. I started looking at things like synesthesia. Was I creating connections that didn't really exist, but it was giving me meaningful information? So there were lots of various areas that I was looking at. But then I decided to actually just go in and look at introception. Now, at that point, the big thing was we don't understand introception. We know that there's a track that could support it. We know that it leads to the insula, but we don't know very much else about how this entire process works. So is introception a function of attention? Is it if we pay attention to our inner body that we will become more introceptively aware? And the early introception methods, or the ways to detect introceptive awareness, were various heartbeat perception tasks, right? Now, what they would do to test introceptive awareness is they would use ECG, and both ECG and EEG to measure objectively somebody's heart rate. That's what the ECG was doing. It was measuring objectively somebody's heart rate. The EEG was there to see what was happening in the brain while all of this was going on. And what they would do is they'd give people random times. They'd be measuring the heart rate objectively. They'd give people random times. And they'd say, well, without taking your pulse, determine your heart rate. It was called the heartbeat perception task. So I decided, well, actually, that's a task. It's good enough. It gives us an understanding of what interoceptive awareness is and how interoceptively aware somebody is. So I decided to look at the heartbeat perception task. But what I decided to do was see how we could test it in various situations. So I changed things around, follow exactly the same thing, ECG, EEG. But the only thing was I had my participants sit in a dark, sound attenuated lab, right? So basically there was no other stimuli that they were exposed to that could distract them. So almost giving them a meditative mind, or trying to cut out the fluctuations of the mind by cutting out all distractions. And so basically they were in this room, we still use the ECG. And the way it worked was, because I didn't even want me as a researcher to distract them, they were in the room, they had a computer there that was completely blacked out until the screen lit up and flashed a cue. So there was absolutely no stimuli. It was beautiful. It was the most amazing place to just chill out and relax. So yeah, so they were asked to actually just sit and pay attention to the heart rate at the start. When the go cue flashes, pay attention to your heart rate. And it was random intervals. And then there would be a stop cue, and they were asked to estimate their heartbeat. So they were never asked to count their heartbeat. They were asked to pay attention to their heartbeat, and then they were asked to estimate the heartbeat. So that's basically a simple heartbeat perception task. But then, and that was brilliant, because what I realized that people, if I got the same person to do this multiple times, they got better at it, right? So we could teach interoceptive awareness by getting them to pay attention to their heart rate. So then I decided, well, what can I do to make this a little more complicated, to see what would happen in alternative situations? So then I started I developed something called the modified mental tracking task. Basically what I did, exactly the same process. The only thing is I started flashing images. While they were asked to pay attention to their heartbeat, I would flash images on the screen, distractors. And I wanted to see what would happen. Would they be able to still give me their heart rate correctly? And we started doing this on people who did the first task. They did very, very well. So we knew that they developed interoceptive awareness. And what would happen if I confused them a bit? Does everybody follow what's happening here?
How do you stop people from not counting? I know you've said you've got them into a meditative state.
You can count. All you can't do is place your hand on your pulse and actually count your pulse. But you can count. You can sit there thinking, I'm paying attention to my heart. One, two. You can do that. Okay. Yeah, but that too is a focus exercise, right? It's meditation. The reason I started these distractors was to see if I changed the cue, if I gave other meditation, if I created models where we used other meditative stimuli, other meditative tricks, so tricks, neurofeedback tricks that were actually simulating meditation tricks, then what would happen? So this is where I was asking them to focus, and then I was distracting them. And these were people who I already knew could focus well because they were scoring well on the first test. What would happen when I distract them? And some people were doing well. So then I decided to make it even more complicated. I use subliminal priming cues. Now, subliminal priming cues are cues that flash up. You don't know that you've seen them, right? They're below your threshold of awareness, so you cannot consciously report on them, right? However, they do affect your mood. So what I started doing was flashing these subliminal cues to see if it would have the same effect on heart rate and variation. So if some people were scoring well on the first task, badly on the second task, then when I did the subliminal priming cues, they would have a similar response. That was what I started doing, was also playing around a little bit with this test, is subliminally flashing a sad face and then presenting them with a neutral or a surprised face, asking them to estimate their heartbeat, and then telling me what the face was. And even though all they saw was a surprise face, very often, people who got better at interoceptive awareness, this was it, people who are better at interoceptive awareness would be able to, they'd say, this face looks surprised, but it makes me sad. So they were able to then, as you got better with interoceptive awareness, you were able to detect the subliminal cue that flashed so fast. And, with subliminal priming cue, we test the person's threshold. So it's always below their threshold because we have different thresholds. So they were able to pick up these cues that were a flash, that most people won't pick up. And that's where I started developing this thing, making it more and more complicated with various scenarios to see what was happening. If I flashed excitable faces and we would detect that heart rate would go up, would they then be able to detect that heart rate correctly? Then let me start using some of these yoga cues. So Patanjali said Pratyahar would not be possible if you didn't have Pranayama. So if I taught Pranayama, let's see how it affected. And this is where the deep breathing, the three-phase breathing that I teach you, this is where we started researching it to see, well, actually, if you breathe correctly, and now we know it's directly related to your parasympathetic nervous system, because the vagus nerve runs the diaphragm. If we actually get you to breathe deeply and to relax and open up your diaphragm and all your intercostals, and for those on the chakra workshop, you'll understand why those intercostal muscles and that diaphragm expansion is so important. But yeah, so then we started looking at how this deep breathing affected interoceptive awareness, right? So you see how that then directly became part of the performance program. And then I started looking at people who were all tight. When we started doing the breathing, I realized, well, actually, even if I thought breathing and I thought it for a long period of time, and people, became quite strong, sometimes people still couldn't breathe deeply because their muscles were so tight. So then I started looking at what would happen if we relax the muscles. And if you notice those diagrams and you've done any of the Maya release classes, you understand why placement of those tennis balls is so precise. If we relax those muscles, people who are tight in those muscles are not going to breathe deeply. They're going to have poor posture. We're going to have aches and pains. So then, yes, so it became a process of actually this is what good interoceptive awareness can be like. And then these are all the things that can prevent it. And how do we remove all those things that could prevent it? And if you notice, every one of those things goes back to directly one step before. So even if I thought the pranayama, well, if the person didn't have the asana, didn't know how to relax correctly, hadn't lengthened out the muscle. So, while I was looking at improving interoceptive awareness and looking specifically at Pratyahar, what had happened was this whole step-by-step process started unfolding and making sense. And I did feel like a fraud. I felt like, hey, this is not even novel. I'm just copying Patanjali. This is basically his work. I'm just taking it. But then we started looking. So when you look at now interoceptive awareness, the various things, we know that interoceptive awareness reduces trait anxiety. We know that with interoceptive awareness, we reduce the effects of eating disorders, body dysmorphia. Interoceptive awareness is related to multiple, hypersensitivity disorders, etc. All comes back. Multiple sensitivities, etc. All comes back to interoceptive awareness. But then we started looking at various, based on this research, we're looking at mindfulness approaches, paying attention. Mindfulness is body awareness, paying attention to the body, exactly what effect it's having on the brain, and how it actually helps or develops or changes the physiology, I could say. The slow breathing, the deep breathing, why the diaphragm is so important, and the belly breathing in terms of vagus nerve stimulation. And then what we started seeing is, and then there's been, in the last sort of couple of years, there have been huge numbers of studies looking at various interoceptive awareness outcomes. And we know it helps with blood pressure, it increases parasympathetic function. You can look at the block on the right, emotional regulation. But for me, the most important thing, I think, was this whole idea of yoga and practicing yoga correctly and its whole effect on autonomic regulation. Because now when we look at healthcare and we look at disease, we understand that it all stems or can actually be treated if we use autonomic regulation. Using drugs can actually give you short-term effects, but there'll be long-term side effects. Whereas if you learn how to create homeostasis using autonomic regulation, you can actually not just reverse symptoms, but actually heal the body. About introspection, I'm not going to go through all of them because I'd rather have a discussion. Coming back to this diagram, which for me just opened up my world, I have to say. This diagram opened up my world. And then post that, when I even did further studies and discovered a few texts that were lost and only came to surface a couple of years ago regarding mama puncture and mama therapy, and realized how much of this information was there, but it was lost, so we didn't have access to it. For me, this is like, it changed my life. It's opened up my world. I can't even express my gratitude to the people who developed this. Yeah, so basically, this whole idea is that the aspects, the limbs of yoga, yamas and niyamas, are about living in society honestly, eliminating our own, or correcting our own, or creating our own moral values. That's the whole yamas and niyamas. The asana tonifies us or strengthens us, enables us to use the skeletal muscle appropriately. Pranayama maintains bioenergetic harmony, also prevents loss of energy. And then the Pratyahar works with the pranayama to give you access to all those nadis and this entire autonomic nervous system that exists with us, that we have access to. We have the kit, we have the hardware, we just need to download the software program. And for me, this yoga is the software program. It's learning how to use it, learning how to use the hardware effectively. After Pratyahar is established, then the external quest, Baharanga sadhana, that's the external sadhana, the external practice, is concluded, and the inner quest, Antaranga, really begins. And when the inner quest really begins, when that inner ability happens, that's when we move to Vibhuti-pada. Now, Vibhuti-pada is blessings or gifts. So the last three, the dhyan, dharana, samadhi, the real meditation, the focus and concentration and bliss that comes, those are all the gifts if you learn how to do these 5 things well. So next week we explore dharana and dhyan, and we move on to let's chat.
Well, one thing you mentioned, Natasha, was that I found really interesting was the impact of becoming desensitized to potentially positive and negative stimuli that are occurring that may be distorting your thought processes, etc. And then also you talked about the intercostal muscles, and I realized that when a baby cries or a baby breathes, they actually breathe a lot deeper and they use the whole of their thorax. Mm-hmm. I wondered how your interoceptive awareness changes as you age with those particular, the desensitization and also the losing of flexibility of the thorax.
True. So yes, the thing is, because we all habituate, because we all norm, because we all try to fit in, and because we all do this, it's completely unconscious, but we limit what we perceive in order to not create inner disharmony. Because, for me, I think this was the important thing, because I decided that I was not going to let go of what was strange about me. It did cause inner harmony, this. I think I quote this often, I think it's, well, they attribute it to Einstein, but I'm not sure if he's actually said it. The question that often drives me hazy, is it me or are they crazy? Or are they crazy? Because that's just it. Because sometimes you're actually experiencing something, you're thinking, but nobody else experiences it. So now in order to fit in, right, we habituate, we block out the things that don't help us fit in. And so we do that enough, and then we stop sensing things that our bodies could at one point naturally sense. So yeah, so if we, if we don't change, if we go on doing that, then as we age, we become less introspectively aware and more extrospectively aware, more focused on what's going on around us, more focused on society and what society's expectations are. So definitely, I think, habituation increases as we desensitize ourselves.
When you're younger, I think this is gross generalization, but I think when you're younger, you think creating harmony is there by actually becoming one of the others, becoming part of a gang, following everybody else. And I think that's what happens to you. It's only as you get older, you develop, hopefully become a little bit wiser, but I'm assuming that's what's happening.
So that's just it. We can, the good thing, the beauty of introspective awareness is that we can learn it at any age. You see, the hardware is there. It may not be active, dominating, but it's there. And we just have to learn how to activate it and it starts working.
I just think it means that you have to be pure, or try and be as pure as you can be. And that's it, really. For me, that's what I get from all of this.
Yeah, that's just it. You have to be as true to yourself. And purity comes from expressing your own inner truth. That's just it. Being pure means just expressing your truth, not masking. Impurity arises when we create that split.
But I think there's also, in addition to what you say, Seema, there's also what Natasha is teaching us, which is, I'm thinking at the moment with the Anahata work we're doing and stimulating the vagus nerve. And so it seems that some of the things we can physically do, combining asanas with breathing, are also kind of move us to that gateway. So it's, that there are actually almost practical techniques that by trying to do those, and because they're quite subtle, your mind gets sucked into them anyway, because I
understand what you're saying. Yeah.
So it's what's beautiful is that Natasha is teaching us how to use our bodies and our breathing, and through that bring our mind into these new ways to inhabit.
Our bodies. And that's coming through as you say, through the breathing and through the actual physical yoga practice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
One thing, how have we evolved to be so bad for our functioning? If there must be some advantage to the way we the social conformity that we do, there must be some evolutionary advantage, otherwise we wouldn't have all in every society have behaved in this way.
Because we weren't as strong as the elephant, as fast as the lion. We banded together, and as a group we were strong. It's still true to today that a group of individuals can make a difference. We now, things are changing slightly. However, and for that reason, we've learned to habituate largely. But then the truth is, it's also led to why we have these societies that live together, but nobody's happy, because the trying to be together has actually forced us to habituate, to change who we are, to exhibit just a fraction of ourselves. And that is not an evolutionary, that's not a evolutionary function. That's more a modern societal function. It's easier to control a group that's very similar. So, as a society, as in the last 2,000-3,000 years, it's something that we've created in order so that we can, maybe it was created in order so that we're easy to control. But is that beneficial? Wouldn't a society where we can all band together but celebrate each other's differences, wouldn't that be a more powerful society? Wouldn't that be a more robust society?
I think I can imagine it raises all kinds of challenges if you're a parent.
Yeah.
So I just let them say, do whatever you like, follow yourself, or come here, sit down, behave. So, you know, it's quite hard to bring up children. And at the same time, you know, want them to understand themselves, follow themselves, and at the same time fit in and be good.
But, you know, does discipline mean that we have to give up part of ourselves? Does disciplining, or can we look, I mean, can we develop a way of looking at each child and actually saying, well, actually, in your case, you need to do X. You know, we created, to make it easier for ourselves, we've created sort of a few blanket rules. And I think, you know, this is, and you can understand why it happens, because it's the easier way. It's easy to discipline a class, you know, where everybody understands this is the rule, and whether you like it or not, you do it. But, you know, if you think about where we're going at the moment, where our only advantage over AI is our own ability to be unique and to create and to think outside the box and to bring in the variation, because all the norming bits, that's easily programmable. So I think, you know, while yes, we can understand in the industrial age, etc., why everybody needed to use a particular, learn how to use the machine if they were going to use the machine, because that's the safe way to do it. But now where we're at an age where that's no longer the problem, machines are taking care of themselves, and our only advantage is going to be finding our edge. So it's, you know, I think we've had, it's something, yeah, go ahead, Ruth.
I mean, it seems to me that what that really points to is a really important, different agenda for education. I mean, I think willy-nilly, whether we like it or not, we're going to normalize our children because they live with us. But equally, I identified earlier on with something you said, which is the first time you spend a night as a child in another house, you're shocked at how different everything is, because, you know, you've never before realized that you could do things in a different order or have something that you don't have at home or something. So, you know, the domesticity is normalizing, and that you can't escape that because you do things every day. But it seems to me what becomes important then is education, and, you know, there to actually, as you say, encourage people to explore the diversity within the class, really, and to but that's a really interesting challenge, because I don't think that our education systems are anything like that.
You know, I agree with you about the education path and, you know, the way children behave. But if you look at if we think about the bigger picture, which Natasha's talking about, it means nothing unless there's something further ahead, and in terms of how people behave. And I'm not even sure if we can, you know, I'm normally a very positive person, but, you know, it's a big ask. It's a big ask. You could start the education program, but there's something, you know, if everybody got into that pure state, somebody somewhere is going to want to lead the program or set the rules or set the parameters, or,
and those people should not be asked to be teachers or to, you know, that's just it. We need to actually understand those people that need, yes, and there's a function for them in society. The ones that want to lead and want to set rules, there's definitely a role for them in society. But, you know, for me, what's absolutely fascinating is when we talk about all these individual differences, and you know, the whole idea that Ruth brought up about domesticity, and we think about family meals, right? Dinner, right? We all eat the same thing, you know, and you get kids that really don't like things. And I remember when I was a kid, I couldn't eat bread. I would eat the filling. I would just not eat the bread. And that was before they realized that I was gluten intolerant. But I knew that bread made me feel awful. Everybody thought that I was misbehaving, you know, etc. But that's just it. So now we actually have that bit. But for me, what's beautiful when we go beyond, before this normalizing and 3 meals a day, and we all should be eating at a particular time, etc., we go back to the Ayurvedic diet. And this was hugely popular, where everybody knew their dosha type. And everybody ate according to their dosha type. And this is the reason, if you think about Indian meals, it's a multiple different types of curry. Why is there always a variety of different, very easy to cook small meals? It was done for centuries, for millennia, where we honored this system. It was only, in all honesty, once formal education started, once, more structured, that's when the rules came in. So it's no, we're not asking to change the system. We're just asking to, let's try and go back to this older system. And it's strange, because this whole thing with this pandemic, where we were working from home, we actually went back, lots of us went back to rhythms that were more suitable for us. And, coming out, moving forward from this pandemic and how our work environments are going to change, we're going to be more likely to be able to go back to this working and eating in ways that actually suit us, that are suitable for our bodies and our dosha types, and taking all of these individualized practices into consideration. The whole idea of Pratyahar is sort of the gateway to this real self-discovery. And, also the other thing that's exciting for me is that, assuming nothing changes, right? Our schooling system doesn't change, our parenting doesn't change. But if we teach kids these practices and they understand that it's not wrong for me to feel that way. Yes, when I'm in this particular class, this is how I should behave, because that's what, this particular person expects, and this is her class. But it's not wrong for me to know that I don't like this. And when I can, in my own time, I don't have to, because, with this, we're supposed to do, there was a lot of guilt, etc., that came into it. And there's a lot of competitiveness. The other thing is, the other Einstein quote, we're all geniuses. But if you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, it's going to spend its life believing it's a fool. So we all have these abilities. We all have these unique talents. It's just about encouraging people to follow this practice, to follow some form of self-awareness, and develop this ability. And for my, and I talked a little about Introspection, but I also, apart from the yogic practices, I looked at various other practices, and some of the shamanic practices, etc., work really well in terms of giving you awareness and insight, etc. And the reason I like the yogic practice is it gives you a very structured way of doing it, and it allows you to see your progression. And also, no matter how amazing an experience is, if it does not alter your physiology in that you repeat it over and over again, it's not sustained. And this is the beauty of a yoga practice for me, because of the way it's practiced with repetition, it becomes sustained. So once you train your interoceptive awareness in this manner, you're not going to lose it. But yes, I can put you into a vacuum, into a darkened room that's soundproofed, etc., and you will feel wonderful. You'll have that meditative experience. But as soon as you come out, you're going to be overwhelmed with the sounds. Yet if you practice, this modulation, if you practice the internal awareness, etc., you can learn to take yourself into that state in a New York subway or anywhere, any noisy place. So thank you. Go ahead.